Welcome back to Story Deep Dive. This is Dana and Rachel, and we are back at it for our next read, which is Dead Until Dark. And this is our first episode, just going over an overview of what you can expect as we cover this book over the next few weeks. But before we dig into this overview and what are some of the things we're excited about talking about when it comes to this story, well, we usually do small talk, y'all, and and after a handful of episodes,
was that a reference to the agenda?
Just a little bit,
When you're hosting.
Yeah.
I will accept no shade any longer about my references to following the agenda.
Listen, I didn't say check. I did not say.
You also didn't say, because it's on the agenda, I must ask. So
Exactly. See, it's different. Same, but different. But one of the things that I wanted to sort of chat with Rachel about is now that we are at the time of this recording, this is our third book into this podcast, which means it's our third month into this podcast. And we talked about doing this podcast for at least 2 years. 4? Has it been 4?
Possibly 4, yeah, because the thing is when we were getting our editorial certifications, we started studying together. That was back in 2020, and we had, so it's maybe been 3 to 4 years, because we'd been talking, because once we started like really studying together, that's when we were like, we should maybe do something together, because as we really quickly, right, started to see like how we both think differently, but then we teased out really interesting, like we had all these really interesting conversations when we would meet. But yeah, that was, we're knocking on something like 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh my goodness. And we've seen like podcasts come and go. And one of the things that we always talked about is just an overflow of the conversations we always have anyway. And so we talk about books with our clients. We talk about books with each other. And so then when it was time for us to sort of sit down and really say, we're going to do this, like for real, because we got close a couple times and then it just didn't happen. I know, so close. And this time, like, we just kicked the ball over. So I'm really curious about like, what are your thoughts now that we are doing this and having these conversations? What are some of the thoughts that you're having?
Yeah, well, I gotta be honest. So, we joked about like, we gotta do a podcast like this. We'd have these really good conversations when we were just like chit chatting, or when we use Marco Polo and send stuff back and forth. And we'd be like, oh, this is why we need to do a podcast. But I gotta be honest, I'm so glad that it's been up until this point, like that it hasn't started up until this point, because number one, really it gave us a lot of opportunities to finesse the actual structure. Because if you remember, the first vision that we had for this, we were going to read 4 books for each month.
That's right.
We were going to read like a stack of related books that we were going to bring to the table for each podcast.
We're not going to tell all that business, because who knows, we may still do that. But yes, I do remember.
We might yet. But yes, but it was a huge ask, which is what delayed us in the first effort, when it was like, we're like trying to read all the books and then we get all our notes together. And so it went through multiple iterations, but I feel like once we got here, from our own experiences, like teaching and working with clients, and also honestly recognizing how much we can talk about just one book. Like like you said, we might yet, do a month where it's like, we're going to, do this whole thing with all these different books. But we've been able to have really in-depth conversations on a single book. And it, like, it's been so, I'm glad that it's not almost in a way like muddied by having to juggle multiple other stories that we're trying to talk about, because we can't even stick to time talking about one aspect of one book. And so, but it also means we have the freedom. I don't, leave it to me. Friggin' rule follower over here. But I think it's given us a lot of freedom to really go into, and again, what we're finding is we haven't even scratched the surface, even when we do that. And I know I personally, over the last, 3 or 4 years, have grown a lot in, as an editor, as someone who's, working with clients and using novels as a tool for both for teaching generally, as well as, in actually working with my clients. And so I feel like now I'm glad we're doing it now, because I feel like it's the right time to be doing it. And so I'm so stinking happy that now, that we finally hit the right time, because I get to spend 4 hours every other week with my best friend. I'm not going to argue with that one little bit. But I also feel like I've established myself enough that I come to the table and I kind of know what I'm about, and have that level of confidence and experience that I'm able to bring a bit more than even 4 years ago. So this is just, I'm really happy about the timing, but I'm having the best daggone time, and I can't wait to do more of this. So what about you?
Oh my goodness, I think you covered a lot of it. I totally forgot about one of the first editions of what we were going to do. We've had reading lists for forever. We talked about them anyway. There have just been times where we just got super busy, and we're super busy now. We're just learning how to just make it happen anyway, which is easier for me to do than you. And so I think that's been good. You know what? I think it's because even though I am super structured, you are super structured, I think.
Oh my God, if you're structured and you're saying I'm super structured,
I think you are.
I can't begin to fathom what that means. I mean, I know I'm super structured, but I think maybe I'm not even as structured as I realize.
But you like for things to sort of, if you said, let's record it tomorrow, I'm going to make it work. Now you will be ready, but you'll be like, wait a minute, tomorrow? As in the day, I mean, I'll do it because you're asking. So I think, even though we're busy making this happen, I think even in how we selected the books, showing, it proves that we just were on a right track to me, because our book selection stood. And I think that's the part that's been so cool, to see the books that we picked, and now that reading them again to prepare, even after we've read them before, it's like, oh, this was a good book. And I know we're probably going to have some where we're going to, vary and differ, but I think we just have enough similarities and enough experiential differences that it still makes it for a really great conversation. And I hope that it also makes a great conversation, whether you've read the book or not, to make you curious about it. And I think that's what we really wanted, not being like, oh my gosh, we're doing this analysis like this, but just giving enough nuggets and enough insight so that people are curious to find out what it means for themselves. And so, on top of the joking and the laughing and all that, I said it in one of these episodes. I was like, I think it's going to be way more fun for us than it is for them. But
if they can have a fraction of as much fun as we're having, they will be having a good old time.
Great.
We have an awful lot of fun.
We do. Even listen, we've been having the technology has been giving me the blues, and we are still just over here just doing the daggone thing. So, yes, I love the fact that our books have stood. I am really enjoying the fact that we're finding a way to just make this work with our existing schedules. And then the other thing is, because we are analyzing this way, and we're having the discussions, we've already, as friends, seen the fruit of having the conversations. Like when we talk about stuff and we talk about books and then we go back to our clients, it makes it so that we've already sort of danced around when it's muddy, so that when we're having the discussions, they're very clear and succinct. And I think we're also having the benefits of it again because we're doing this. And so just doing this and thinking through stuff so that when I'm sitting down to work up my curriculum, I was like, oh yeah, I would say it like this and this. And it's not that you don't do it any other time, but having that back and forth, even when you say things a little bit different and I'm like, that hits different. I like that. Or when we just sort of talk out and just flush it out the rest of the way. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I think, right? That's how I feel about that. And so I'm just hoping that it brings that same energy for listeners, and that as we sort of dive into books that we haven't read as much, I think that's when it's really going to get good. Well, yeah. I think I'll see how I feel. Ask me how I feel after the next book.
We'll check back in. It's just like, is it good? Are we? I'll find out in the preview episode. I'll be sure to check in.
So then I'd love to also maybe talk just a little bit about like how we decided to select our books. And then, yes, y'all, we're going to have this conversation for a little bit, and then we'll be getting into Dead Until Dark. But
yeah, we'll talk about the juice.
Yeah, bringing it like we just, right. So, like, talk a little bit about how we selected the books. I'll start us off a little bit. We sort of, I think for what we probably would just peg as the first season is sort of the books that we already knew we wanted to talk about. Books that are just reliable and faithful for recommending to clients. Also ones that we've had and recommended to each other, or ones that we were reading as we were each just trying to just feel our way through. When we both started studying, we were at different places in our client work. But I think because when we really just started studying together and became really good friends, we sort of went through that same sort of rites of passage. It sort of just was like a leveler in a lot of ways. But it also meant that it gave us room that when we came on the other side, sort of you starting to go through and find your way to crime and fantasy, and me romance and fantasy, and then we just have some overlaps and started like cross sharing books and sort of having clients that needed this or that, and I could say, well, have them read this book, have them read that book, and then us talking about it. But what are some of the things that you look for? Because I know I'm always going for a good contemporary something. Give or take. Y'all listen, I like regular categorical fiction. I don't need roses and flowers. I don't need sonnets and all of that. But yeah, what about you? What are you looking for?
I mean, besides ghosts and murder, that's why you bring so much important balance to the podcast, because I'm like, this book is gritty. Aren't you excited, Dana? And you're like, no, I'm not. And I'm like, but there's so much murder. And you're like, I don't want murder. And I'm like, but murder. Like, it's just...
When I called you about those ghosts in Ninth House, I said, listen, I don't think I know you. Who are you? Who are you really? Who are you really? I thought I knew her. We didn't stayed under the same roof. We didn't even share the same room.
We shared a bed.
We shared a bed. Who are you, ma'am?
We fell asleep in the same bed watching Pride and Prejudice together.
We did. And then you got me reading some ghosts. I was like, I thought we were the same person, but I see no. No,
my favorite part is that in the Ninth House podcast, you admitted that you were like, I didn't even read the blurb. Rachel said to read it, so I just picked it up and didn't read the blurb. If you had read the blurb, you would have known that there were ghosts. But the fact that you didn't, so you showed up to this book and you said, I'm sorry, did you say ghosts? Is my favorite.
Rachel, when I started reading and I said, wait a minute, what? I flipped that book over. Listen, y'all, I'm going to keep it 1,000 with y'all. What saved her was her husband. Because he was like, well, listen, he always gives the best commentary from the sidelines. His B-roll
So
is
true.
everything. So therefore, he was like, well, sometimes, hey, listen, I was listening to him because at that point, I didn't know Rachel. I didn't know her.
You're like, I can't trust you. Trevor, I know, but Rachel, I can't trust you.
Listen, I was like, both of us scary. I know you scary. I know I'm scary. How did this get in the whole lineup? How sway? I didn't have the answers. So yes, the fact that she was just so, this is my favorite book. This is, oh my God. She had it as a prop. It was in the background. I was sold. And listen, y'all, it was downhill from there. And then about what, like, probably about 2/3 through, I was like, man, I don't know about this, Rach. I don't know. And then Trevor came through in clutch, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna finish it. Then I was like, that book was really good.
In the end, I was vindicated, but we were real dicey there for a minute. This is
2 minutes.
like
2
we
minutes.
talked about. It was
Not 1 minute.
it was a hot couple of minutes. And we talked about this in the podcast. It was, this is Rachel's like metal listening and crime. This is like my gritty crime story side, which is just a side that you knew existed, but you've never gotten a book recommendation from that side. Like, that part of me has never been like, Dana, I have a book for you.
Girl,
Because I also was like, Knox Morgan in Things We Never Got Over. Like, it's both of these things are existing in the same person, and all I can say is I'm sorry.
Girl, listen. First of all, I need to be knocked out because I was not paying attention to context clues. I didn't pay attention to the cover. I didn't pay attention to the snake. Rachel, I don't know what I was doing.
For the viewers, this is the cover of this book. It's got creepy text and a big old snake.
You said buy it, read it. I said okay, because we had read so many other. Listen, but yes. But I think it's even as we laugh and realize how that story was sort of this great combination between where you have this love of literary fiction, and it sort of does have a feel of a categorical sort of fiction, and that it does feel contemporary and sort of like almost very modern. The fact that you have it set on a college campus. So it I know why you picked it now, but then you could have missed me with that, girl. Especially when that goes, I was like, oh, heck no. And then when I realized, girl, all I could think of was Sixth Sense. I see dead people. I was done. I was done.
Like, someone called Bruce Willis. Was it Bruce Willis in that movie?
Yes, it was.
Right? Okay,
Yes, it
I had a
was.
small panic when I let out a name, and I was like, what if that's not the guy, and I'm about to be really embarrassed.
It's on a recorded line, and you can't take it out.
You can't. There's no going back. I think I haven't answered the question yet. Of like, what do I choose? Oh, right. What do I choose in a book besides ghosts and murder? So for these first picks, I know that I was kind of leaning on either books that we had already read together and had good discussions on, which I think is really the case with Dead Until Dark especially, but also books that I have, recommended to clients or taught from, just, getting into the podcast and establishing our schedule and the feel of it, to give ourselves as much of a leg up as possible, into it, minus the fact that I've done through you some curveballs. I guess I gave myself a leg up. I don't know about I'm not sure if I maybe did you dirty just a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah.
Just a hair.
A little bit.
But yeah, I was really pulling on books that I've taught from before, and that have enough, that I would strongly recommend a writer learn from it, and that there's plenty for us there to dig into and talk about, so that as we get into new books, we've already kind of established some of our baseline books that we're regularly recommending to clients and talking about and teaching from. And so giving ourselves kind of that strong start with some really some heavy hitter picks that really have a lot going on, so that we can kind of establish the podcast, right, and what it is, and hopefully provide lots and lots of value up front right out the gate.
I agree. I know for me, it's similar. I remember one conversation that we had early on, and it wasn't online, like it wasn't a hot mic. What we talked about, where like you really lean more towards masterworks, and I don't. But at the same time, I'm very aware of why I pick certain books and what they can help a writer do. And I find that having a mixture of those, I think we can kind of take it for granted because we're pretty good at like selecting and knowing when something is off. But when you are working with people and they have issues with finding masterworks, or have issues with identifying comps, you realize it's really not that straightforward. So starting to have these conversations where people can see like what we're talking about and what we're looking at. And even if we're not going in like to this deep analysis, it's usually enough to say, that's one I need to take a look at. Or no, I'm not sure if that one's for me. And I think that's a great starting place, because if you hear the conversation and then you read the book, you go in, even though, I mean, we try not to do spoiler alerts, but if you're doing it to study, you're going to have spoiler alerts. It's just how it's going to go. But if you are able to sort of go into it knowing that these are some of the things I can take away, that first pass is just going to be to read. That second pass, then you can start thinking about, well, what do I see? And when you get to that third pass, then come back and listen to the episodes and some of the things that rose to the top. And especially if there are things that you are aiming to get better at, or there's the things that you didn't even know you needed, like us having the conversation about talking about when we had in this book that we're going to talk about now, having both of those genres equally on the page. Sometimes people know they want to have a romance, and they know they want to have a crime story, but maybe they are still trying to decide whether they want to be a duel and that it is truly a fusion, or whether they want one as a subplot. And what does that mean? And so I think what it can do is help you to not so much have a languaging, but have an understanding so that you can ask better questions, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's with your editor or your critique group, or if you are in one of our communities or on one of our Substacks, be able to ask questions to help you get to a place where it helps you to have an understanding enough to bring it to the page. And if you can do that, you can learn anything. You can learn anything.
That's so true. And the thing is that, you can learn anything from any book, right? Like the opportunities. I always, tell my clients, it's like, okay, if you hate the book, and I've had to go through this, because we talk about, historical fiction, and I, was digging through a bunch of different books looking for comps and stuff. And I was like, oh, I hate it so much, because we found some really books that I found really boring, and I had to like wade through them and say, okay, what's not working? Where is the pacing? And really, right, learning, just like you said, to ask those questions. And then there's, like you said, there's nothing you can't learn. And then you can really start to approach every book like a writer and take something from it, whether you loved it or whether it was giving you the ick, right? And so the one thing that I want to say about this podcast that I've so enjoyed is when we come together to record, like, it is keeping me regularly inspired, because when we sit down to record and we have these conversations about great books, I am ready to get back after it. Well, let me go to bed first and like sleep, and then like come back the next day, because these recording sessions are intense. But making that contact with books and exploring them more deeply and hearing different perspectives and, sharing in that mutual appreciation or consideration it's been really keeping me, it's like, it's kind of like keeps that fire going so that I'm ready to get back into the writing and get back into working with my clients. And I'm excited because it's kind of keeping me connected to that heartbeat. And so I hope that this can also do that for our listeners as well, to be like, oh man, like there's so much good stuff to read. There's so much good stuff to learn, and kind of keep that curiosity fueled.
And I think another layer of this too becomes that it can make it very practical, right? Because you can go to a lot of places and it becomes so much theory. Listen, I've been doing this a long time and I still be like, what the heck are they talking about? Like, Rachel, I'll be like, listen, I know they were speaking English. I know they strung some English words together. But what in the heck are they talking about? I don't know. And y'all, I'm so for real. Like, are we curing cancer? Or are we writing steamy romance, right? And so I think also like getting this point of where you're curious enough to give yourself permission to just try. Like put some words on the page and keep trying, because part of this is not just about getting inspiration, but getting inspiration and turning it into something that only you could do. Whether you are writing manually or writing with AI or writing with ghostwriters or doing the plotting or whatever it is that you're doing that gives you this clear representation of you as a storyteller. And so I hope that we inspire that, as people who love story and have clearly some really different takes on stuff. but here, listen.
Keeps it exciting.
But it still works. It keeps it exciting and it works. It works. So yeah. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think this that pretty much covers it. And I just love that opportunity to kind of take a pulse on where we've been so far. We're three books and 3 months in, and so getting to just and having this book as our third, where it's like we did a Rachel pick, we did a Dana pick, and then we found a book that was like all Rachel and all Dana at the same exact time, which is just. It's one of those things where you're like, I can't believe a book like this exists, but it sure does, and it makes it. I'm so excited to get to talk about this one.
I am too, and I want to say for the record, we've read this book more than once, and it just seemed like because of reading it at this time, preparing for a conversation, I'm so glad that we had recorded enough episodes that by the time that we got to this one, that you're sort of aware of like how the dance happens, because we can't cover everything, but that it really is like neck and neck, both of us, in all the best possible ways, and that you can appreciate the other. And so with that said, I think that's a great segue to the summary. She over here doing spirit fingers. It's not spirit fingers time, Rachel. I'm just saying. Not. Whoa.
It is always spirit finger time, okay? I am going to give you my unsolicited and unstoppable enthusiastic moral support. And so you get the spirit fingers, everybody gets the spirit fingers.
Listen.
I will die on this hill. I didn't know this was a hill that I stood on, but now I'm going to die on it.
I didn't know it was that important, but now it is. And I'm saying it
now it's a thing.
Girl, I'm done. Tell Trevor come get his wife. Oh my gosh. So with that said, let me go ahead and give you all the quick summary, and we're going to just get into our overview and our preview of Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris. Y'all, I every time I see my face on the re-recordings of me trying to pronounce people's names, y'all charge it to my head and not my heart. I promise you. Okay. So Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris is a novel that expertly blends mystery, romance, and the supernatural into one addictive read. This book introduces us to Sookie Stackhouse, a small town waitress with telepathic abilities whose life takes a dramatic turn when she meets Bill Compton, a vampire trying to live among humans. But just as their romance begins, a series of brutal murders rocks the town of Bonton, each victim being a woman connected to vampires. As suspicion and danger close in, Sookie is drawn into a deadly mystery where both her heart and her life are at risk. Dead Until Dark is a masterclass in weaving romance with high stakes crime, creating a story that keeps readers hooked with its tension, character depth, and genre fusion. So today we're going to talk about this story that we, again, have said that we love. And what are some of the things that you want to make sure that readers and writers get from this story?
Yeah, so I want to kind of there's a few like high level things that I want to make sure kind of readers and writers are primed for, particularly reading this story, but also for our conversation, right? So number one, we are in like full blown, full mystery and full romance. If you are looking to pull off either of those things, take notice, take notes. My crime clients who don't have a who don't have a romance component, I still have them read this book because it's a very well done mystery and it's a fully like playing fair with the audience, investigation, clues, killer on stage, hidden in plain sight, mystery. And then it's also, if you're looking to combine those two, if you're doing something like writing a mystery romance, this is another great read for that. But I say this in every episode, I'm going to bang on about it for the next 3 episodes. And I really do think it's important because it just changes the way that this story unfolds in certain ways. That this is the first novel in a series, and in a serial style series where every book is kind of a standalone adventure in this world following this one protagonist. And the reason that's important is because this book is setting up a lot of things we're going to explore in the rest of the series, and it's going to close its loops on a story level, but it's opening up many more loops to lead us into the series. And so that does change some of the ways that we approach the romance, as well as, the extent, for example, of character transformation that we see, right? Because it's the series or the transformation is not complete in this one book because we're about to go with Sookie on a whole bunch of adventures. And I think that adding that caveat is like, you should study this book for what it does, but having that caveat will help you to be wise about the way you're approaching the book and how you're studying certain aspects of it.
I totally agree. I do want to sort of point out, and not just as in it shows up the same way in every single book, but just understanding when we say that it's both aspects, romance and mystery, and it's a crime story, when you bring those two together, that means that those two components are present at every major turning point of the story, that they inform and provide conflict and tension and sometimes relief to each other. And it really is sort of match pacing each other throughout the story so that you don't get one or the other that's the subplot for the other. And honestly, there's been other stories like we talked about in our opening that they are subplots, and you don't find a lot of stories that really hold it tight neck and neck like this story does. And before we get to the next part that I want to say, we did want to show the covers. Now listen, this book was released in 2001. Rachel got the snazzy cover. Y'all, I'm gonna have to show y'all my Kindle. I got the old cover that looks like a floating vampire. Yeah, this looked like somebody's child did it. I know it's probably with some wonderful artist. I apologize, but this is what my cover looks like. Can we see your cover, Rachel?
Yeah, I want to say the thing about that cover is that it doesn't exactly scream sexy vampire adventure.
It doesn't.
Okay. Y'all, this is funny because by this point you guys know us, okay? So she has kind of like the old school cover. Why is old lady Rachel running around with this sexy old cover from the HBO series? Because this is a visual bit. For the viewer or for the listeners, you just should know that the cover is like a very pale woman with very red lips, and it's like from the nose to like the bottom of the neck, so it's not a lot, and the focus is on very red lips, and you can see a little bit of white fang in the teeth, and then a little trickle of blood down the side of the mouth, but then the tongue is coming out to lick the blood. It's a very sexy looking, like this screams sexy vampire adventure, whereas Dana's is giving like Nancy Drew, kind of like Nancy Drew but vampires, you know what I'm saying? So it's just important to us that you see the two different, because we have planned to study this book forever. I have studied it. You can see the volume of tabs that we're working with where I tracked the crime versus the romance. Y'all, I was taking this bad boy to the pool at my apartment complex back in the day, and all the people in my apartment complex saw me with this book in my hands, and I'm sure I left an impression. So, looking like a vampire myself in the sun, if we're honest.
So part of this actually leads into one of the other things we wanted to make sure that we talk about in this preview, which is, Rachel's cover told it all, which we're dealing with vampires, and there are hints of shifters, and even in the summary we realize that Sookie has telepathic abilities. But the other thing that we want to talk about, that this book is dated in some ways. The original, well, at least the version that I have, was released in 2001. I know Rachel's was a reprint based on them having the TV series, or I think it was Showtime, but having a series, a television series. And so one of the things that you're going to find in the in the book version is the fact that it's dated. So how they sometimes refer to people of color, how they may refer to people that are in the LGBTQ community. But on the flip side, it is a book that has a lot of diversity as far as the characters, beyond the fact that you have other species. And some of the most prominent themes can be connected to that as well. But you are set in a small town in Louisiana. So it's a small southern town, and you know it. You know it by the dynamics of everything that's going on, and even to the point of what pulls Sookie in, because everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows everybody's business. Well, give or take the other stuff that comes to the light because of the investigation. But and so those are some of the things that you really want to know. I don't believe that it takes away from what you can learn and enjoy in the story, but it is worth, because every once in a while I was like, did they just? And it's like, yeah, they did just say that.
Yeah, and we had we'll have this conversation later in the podcast where and you'll listen to us as we're actually kind of wrestling through what language we would use, because what the way that I kind of labeled it is we have a dated handling of a diverse cast. So in the story, like Sookie is someone who is I think that she's meant to be portrayed as tolerant, right? So she really likes the members of the LGBTQ community who are in the story, and she forms friendships so we have some representation of like ethnic representation in this book, and then we'll see more of it in like later books as well. And so we do have like that diverse cast. What we're missing is that sensitivity, right? So we kind of have diversity with 25-year-old, like, you know what I mean? It was like, it's a 25-year-old attempt at diversity, but it lacks some of that sensitivity. And so it's that, it's trying, but it falls short, especially, as, our 2025 sensibilities do not agree with like, you see some of the language and it doesn't feel good because it's because
it
it's
just
dated,
doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think it's not, and we can also say it's also the same way when it comes to some of the comments about women, and and even in the sense of like misogyny and prejudice. And so, what I like, even as we're talking about this, that these actually fuse onto some of the themes that are a part of this story. So almost unintentionally, you are addressing it, even in the dated capacity. So we do have that, but it's not one of those things that's just smack dab in your face. So we're telling you now, it's kind of like when you're trying to wrestle with, should you give a trigger warning or not? It's almost like you giving the warning is more than the actual presence of it in the material. But I think it's still important to note. And so we've said that. Another thing that did you want to bring anything else with that? Because I don't want to.
Oh, no, I think we covered that. And again, I just think it's important to like kind of to have both of those things in hand of like, the effort as well as the like where it falls short. And I think it's important to note that because we're telling people you should go read this book. And so it's important to be like, hey, we're not advocating for everything, like for, everything that's in the book. And so we're recognizing its shortcomings. But I think that this is also a good segue into, this is not a conversation of, like what would be like considered sensitive or offensive, but it's interesting because we are also dated kind of in the romance in some of the like romance language. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about, so this book is steamy, and the thing I want to say to kind of like lead into it, as I was reading this book, what's funny is, so Dana was like, oh yeah, this book actually is pretty steamy, right? And it's sort of like oh dang, yeah. What's funny is when I was reading this book, I was like, this isn't as steamy as something like, say, The Things We Never Got Over. And I was like, well, that seems weird. Like, I remember this book being like, oh my goodness, oh dear, oh, what do I, and then I'm noticing that it's not as steamy. But not that it's not as steamy, but it's less explicit in the steamy scenes as something like The Things We Never Got Over. And this is something that you explained to me off of the recording. And so can you talk a little bit about the change in the language, over the last 20 years in your in your romantic scenes?
So the first thing that I will say is that we can say steamy depending on if you're a part of the book talk or TikTok culture, you may call it spicy. Now what's going to happen is when you get to this story, at first, it's going to come off as not being as steamy as more contemporary romances are nowadays, but really you'll find that it is due to the actual language used in the scenes. We are more explicit in some of the words that we use. So the verbiage itself and the word choices is a lot more censored in this book. However, if you look at it like scene for scene, this book would still be on the steamier side because there are more intimate scenes. And you tackle on the fact that you have an element that could be considered kink or a fetish when it comes to biting, vampire blood, the fact that it is mixed in both a sexual context and arousal context, that it can seem like it just sort of just gives it more and more notches, even though the verbiage and the literal act of it being written out is a little bit more on the censored side. So it is a steamy, there is biting, there is listen, Rachel said it and y'all know she says it better sometimes. But in the beginning, I was like, girl, where you see it? What page did you say this steamy on? Because if you come from a regular steamy, it's like, it's not really that big of a deal. But when you go back and you start studying and like, okay, well, how many scenes are they? How do they progress, etc. It's like, okay, maybe this is. And so I would just say, if you are someone that you clutch your pearls because it's on the page, you probably could still get through it, but it is on the page. And then the fact that as they go along in their relationship, it gets a little bit more, y'all, they do what grown folks do. I don't know what else to say, but but just know that it's there. But I will say this, and this is something that we do discuss further in the episodes, is the fact that even though on the surface you sort of have this conversation about vampires, and the first thing we think about with vampires is biting and blood, and the fact that the actual presence of the vampire blood really takes on its own sort of context. And we don't talk about it at length, but I do think it was sort of a way of, I don't want to say normalizing, but just really sort of just, it's almost like that the blood itself becomes this sort of dynamic between the humans and the vampires because of the creation of a synthetic opportunity for them to be able to feed without harming humans. But then also that it is a sense of contention within the vampire community, and it's also a sense of contention in the human community. So it becomes this thing, on top of the fact that it is something that is sought. Vampire blood is sought as almost like a drug, and it has healing properties, and it's just all these different things. And again, it's just another layer that the author brings to this, the texture of this story, that I thought was a really great usage. And once you read it a couple times, you realize like, oh, and even that, right, is right up front. It's front and center, chapter 1, of the lengths that people will go to get their hands on vampire blood, which puts vampires in harm's way. So it's just sort of that play with life and death stakes in that capacity for vampires. And for humans, it's that they can be bit and either changed or drained. And so, yeah, so you don't miss the fact, even though it's sort of treated sort of lightly a little bit, but the vampires are still deadly, right? It's like they're still deadly, like, well, dead and so dark, but yes, they're so deadly. So we talked about the steamy, the dated, the kink. The other thing that I will say that is really important as you go through and reading this book is understanding, because there is a fusion between the romance and the mystery, that you have reader expectations for both that are present on the page. And this is another reason why we both repeatedly recommend this book, even if you have no desire of writing a vampire or no desire of doing shifters or having some sort of otherworldly aspects or I would like to say fantastical aspects, or have this super long suspension of belief. The way that the actual crimes are carried out, the way that they are depicted in the book, the ones that she chooses to do on the page and off, are all just really great. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, just about having those different expectations. And you talk about it a lot too with the characters and all that, but I'd love for you to add some more to that, just, as a preview.
Yeah, I think, when you're this is gonna be like nerd talk coming out, but when you're kind of dual wielding genres, this is really something you have to really be aware of, right? Like if you're gonna mix in a crime story, and if you're going to make it a crime forward story, you better know what your crime raters are looking for. If this is gonna have the appearance of a murder mystery, you better deliver on the murder mystery. And so this story does that. It hits, let me think, let's see if I can come up with maybe like 4 kind of essential elements, right? Of a murder mystery crime story. That's going to be, your protagonist is picking up clues that are going to lead them to the identity of the killer. And the killer is someone we have met on the page. I wrote a whole Substack post sort of delineating between, a crime versus a thriller versus a suspense versus, there's one more that I'm blanking on what the fourth category was, but because the expectations for these are different. So, kind of knowing what you're going into. But if you're writing a crime story, we need to see that killer on the page. The reader needs to be able to have guessed who it was based on the information you presented them in the story, which is why your protagonist investigating is so important. What we also see is the suspects. So there's a couple different ways you can handle suspects. A lot of times when you have an outsider protagonist coming into a situation to investigate, you kind of have a constrained pool of suspects that you're looking at. So our suspects are these 4 people, and we're trying to whittle it down among them. This story is happening with an insider. These are all people she knows, so she has no reason to specifically expect that it's any of them, except that there are all these people who have motive and opportunity, and who look awfully suspicious. So we don't have a defined pool of suspects, but we cannot figure out, of all the people we're meeting, who it could possibly be, and that's really a part of the thrill of the story. So you've got your protagonist is investigating, they're gaining clues that are leading us toward a killer, and we have a pool of suspects. So those are kind of all of the things that you're looking for when you're creating a mystery. And she puts all of those on the page, plays totally fair with us, and still manages to surprise us. And that's when you've really hit on something good, which is why, even though most of my crime clients aren't going to write anything with vampires, I actually recommended it to one crime client, and I was like, hey, this is a really great example of these things, and it's a great example of a crime. And the first time a vampire showed up, which is, right as she opens the book, and she was like, I'm sorry, vampires? What? And I was like, oh, I should have warned, my bad. I should have warned, oops. So those are some of the things that you're going to be looking for when it comes to looking at the mystery aspect of this story specifically.
Mm-hmm. Now, as Rachel was saying that, and again, we don't go into the nitty gritty of this, but if you are a romance writer, you will see all of those all of the main reader expectations when it comes to romance. They're meet cute. You see the increase of tension and romantic tension and the evolving of their relationship. You see a breakup scene. You see grand gesture. You see they're happy for now versus a happily ever after, and you will see that all the way through. And what's amazing, of course, and I can't forget first kiss and the physical intimacy. But what's amazing is that the mystery elements and that crime elements is touching and concerning everything about, even down to them coming together the whole time. And the romance is also affecting the everything about the crime and the crimes that are being committed. And so when you start looking at it in that aspect, again, that's why we say that it really is matching pace. And you see all of the essential beats and scenes for both genres in this story, which is not like you don't. I'm sure if we keep looking, but it's one of the ones. This is the most enjoyable read where you get to see it work out, and it's great. So know that you'll have both of that, and that's what we kind of mean by that fusion. And so it makes for a great read. Were there any other things that you wanted to ensure that we bring up? Also know that we say vampires, but there are also some hints of other beings. Also, which was in the summary, the fact that Sookie has gifts that she sort of has had her entire life that she's wrestled with. And it's really this sort of play between her struggling to be normal her whole life and not being normal, and the sort of the pros and cons that come with that, and what causes her to be drawn to Bill besides just the fact that he's a vampire, because that is a part of the appeal originally, right? It's a part of the appeal, but there are aspects that she can see to the essence of him and he can see to the essence of her that really is the foundation of their relationship. And I would say this book does an amazing job of ensuring that there are stakes for both of them. There are life and death stakes for Sookie, and there are life and death stakes for Bill on so many levels that they both have to navigate. And it's because of the romance and the crime, right? Those two elements make the navigating of that relationship extremely hard, and the determination of who the culprit is extremely hard, and which makes the culprit, listen, he did his thing. Oh dang. Said he. I don't know, we're not gonna give nothing away. So that's anything else that we need to make sure that we cover before they get into I will say that this is a very interesting play when it comes to characters. We do talk about this, the fact that for the environment, usually in a small town story, you have a lot of secondary characters that sort of just add color and dynamic. And you do have that to a certain extent, but it's not as in depth as you may find in some other stories of this kind, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think, I want to say, I think one of the reasons for that is because this series doesn't stay small town, right? So, so if we think about a place like Knockemout, right, it stays small town. So we stay in Knockemout and we're going to meet these characters. And so we kind of need characters to keep us in, like as a part of keeping us in Knockemout, versus Sookie's world is actually expanding because of the events of the story. So this story like pushes Sookie into a new kind of life where she still lives in Bontom. So we're still going to meet some of the meet some of the small town characters again. But the cast is really going to grow over the course of the series. So that's where it differs, even though it takes place in a small town. I think that's where it differs in a really big way from your typical small town story, because part of the excitement of the series itself is the fact that these are actually not the only people we're going to spend time with. And in every book, the cast is going to get bigger and we're going to meet new people and see new facets of the world. I mean, literally the second book is Living Dead in Dallas. So she goes to Dallas where she sees this world and what it looks like in a big city like Dallas. And so that's where we shift away. So it's not the expectation that's set in the series is not that the whole thing is small town, but that actually the world is about to get a whole lot bigger. And I think that's part of why we don't see that same kind of cast that we would normally expect for a small town anything, for a cozy small town series, or for a small town romance, anything that would normally be like a small town serial.
Mm-hmm. I would also say, to me, it made me think, because you're in this book establishing why vampires are even accepted in mainstream society, it almost makes you think of like a science fiction book, where in the beginning you are trying to lay the groundwork of how this all came to be. And while we're doing that, we are wrestling with the fact that you have all of these bodies. Right? So she really had to also establish the state of the world, establish the stakes, establish the players that are a part of this world. And it's really, I don't know what I would think the word count is, because I don't think it's really as long as it could have been. It's pretty tight.
No, I mean, yeah, I don't know about word count, but definitely. So this is sort of like, I don't know, probably close to trade paperback size.
Yes.
It's not even 300 pages. It's 292. So I mean, it doesn't even. So she could. What I think is quite amazing actually is, could she technically have made a longer book? Yes. But she opted to pack all of this into a much smaller book. And I think the benefit of that is that it gave her a lot of room in the series to really kind of just, because I think she knew she was writing a serial, right? And that she was going to write more books and have more kind of stuff coming down the pipeline in this world. And so she gave herself, I think she practiced a lot of restraint and committed to pulling off this one book, and it gave her a lot of room to say, we're going to keep teasing out this story and keep teasing out the implications and the world over the course of the series, which is not something you would see as often in like a sci-fi or a fantasy, where, we're establishing, but that's also because they're of a determined length, right? Usually they're a determined, if they're in a series, there's 3 books, there's 5 books, there's a plan for the number of books, versus we're just gonna go and see what happens, and see what kind of adventures Sookie gets to have, and leaving all of that space open to play inside of that serial style.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing that I will say, and we don't go into a lot about, but we do talk about this, is this book has an amazing first couple of chapters. The whole book is good, but the first couple of chapters, if you want to talk about setting up a book, setting up the promise to the readers, setting up the expectations of what to get, what's at stake, what the conflict is, from the jump, we are in there, and it continues to, the stakes continue to grow, and it turns into even more of a life or death situation for Sookie as well as Bill. And I think that is something really, really great to see, of how she was able to pull off something that intense this super early in the book, and that it escalates from there. Like, that literally is the ground floor of everything. And so this is a great book to study the first couple of chapters. And the first act. I mean, the whole thing is great, but that is just, so that's another great thing about this book. And that she does a great job of continuing to up, and those twists keep coming. And we see Sookie turn into someone we really want to see win. And we really want to see her have the love that she wants. And she pays the price, in this story.
Yeah. And I want to say, like, something that's, so amazing about the first chapter of this book, just like you said, and I love this as an example for my crime as well as my romance, and then definitely for my mystery romance writers, using the first chapter to establish, sets the tone in every way. Right? We get the life and death stakes, we get mention of our first body, and we also get the hint of that there's going to be romance, particularly in the interactions between Sookie and Bill. So she immediately, or not quite immediately, but very quickly recognizes how seductive Bill is, and he's low-key trying to put the moves on because he's a vampire. It's what he does, right? And he's like, "That was very brave of you," and she was like, "Don't even try it with me, okay?" And right, we get even these phrases. It's such a vivid phrase that she uses that I remember the phrase. She says something like, in a voice so seductive it would have shivered Arlene right out of her red nylon panties. I mean, when you think about using language like that and describing something like that, it kind of tells you what kind of book you're in, right? It lets you know it's gonna, I don't know if you would say, if you would fully say that it tells you it's gonna be steamy, but it lets you know there's gonna be romance. And so it really, and even the seductiveness of Bill and the way that she, because he also makes multiple sort of suggestive remarks at her. And so again, it establishes that romance tone and the, almost like that sex is on the table in this story. Right. And so it really, but it does all of that, right? I mean, we have life and death, we have our first body, and we have some sort of sexy, suggestive vampire remarks that tell us everything that's about to be in this book as far as tone goes,
Mm-hmm. I think it's hilarious that Rachel's talking about sex is on the table. Listen, I'm be the true romance person. As soon as she said my vampire, I knew, right? She says my vampire. When my vampire came into Merlot's, and as soon as you see like that, it's already this sense of association, almost her own version of claiming, which is a huge sort of universal fantasy sort of vibe of that you find in romance. And so you see that from the beginning. So you really could spend a lot of time just sort of just sitting in those first couple of chapters to get an understanding of what you're going to come across, and the fact that the promise is made in both the romance and the crime story. Let's see. Are there any other things that you don't want us to miss before we wrap up this episode?
I don't think so. We pretty much hit all of them. I mean, we got at the mystery. We talked about your, kind of essential beats, which is a great setup for our plot conversation. We hit characters, as far as, what we do and kind of don't have, but we'll go really in depth on the characters, in the characters episode. So I think, if you took this and you showed up to read the book and listen to the next few episodes, I think you're in for, number one, I think you're in for a great ride. And I think there's so much to gain from reading this book. And I think that everybody's kind of well primed for that experience. So I hit everything that was on my list anyway.
I think the last thing, because I don't think, this is what happens when you record multiple episodes, okay? Is that the one thing that we can't forget, because I don't think we've said it here, is one of the great things about the story is that Sookie is not a damsel in distress. And we sort of talked about the fact that she sort of shows up and she, look, I done said this in another episode, she nook if you book. She trying to be all up in the middle of stuff, whether she should be or not. And I think that's one of those things that really help this story, because she is growing. She's growing just in her own right of as a young woman, as someone who has wrestled with this ability her entire life and trying to adjust to what is right and wrong in utilizing it. And that we're going to get more of it over the course of the series, but you get a really great understanding of the hardships that have come with it. And in this story, she's got to wrestle with that, because it could be the difference between the right person going down and the wrong person going down. And it just makes you, again, root for Sookie. Even when she's just a ham, because she's like, I'm Sookie Stackhouse. I'm like, Lord, if she don't quit saying her whole name, her whole entire government name. And I still want to know, is it really Sookie, or if it's Sookie supposed to be short for something else? Girl, I guess we're going to have to find out. So with that said, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this first episode in our read of Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris. You are in for an absolute treat. And if you haven't done so already, do not forget to grab your copy. This is another one of those great books that is available in both print, ebook, and audiobook. And we will be moving forward in talking about the plot and characters just like previously. So join us for future episodes and go ahead and grab your copy of this book. We will see you all really, really soon. And as always, happy writing. Goodbye.